Story on GB News tonight is that the head of the Wagner mercenary group that launched an attempted military coup in Russia at the weekend says today he didn't mean to overthrow Putin. Speaking for the first time since the group's march on Moscow, Yevgeny Prigozhin said today that the progress of his troops highlighted serious security problems in the country. In an audio message released on his Telegram account, Prigozhin added that his troops turned around to avoid spilling the blood of Russian soldiers. President Putin, for his part, didn't mention the mutiny in a video address released today. Well, here the Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says the rebellion has shown the world that Russia is not as strong as was previously thought.
Prigozhin's rebellion is an unprecedented challenge to President Putin's authority, and it is clear that cracks are emerging in the Russian support for the war. I, of course, hold no candle for Prigozhin or his forces. They have committed atrocities in Ukraine and elsewhere, but he has said out loud what we have believed since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion, that this invasion was both unjustified and unprovoked.
That is breaking news just coming to us in the last 15 minutes or so. Russia has said that it scrambled fighter jets to intercept three, what it says were British military aircraft heading towards the Russian border. The Russian Defence Ministry claims an RC-135 reconnaissance and electronic warplane and two Typhoon fighter jets were heading over the Black Sea. The ministry says the aircraft have now turned back. No confirmation from the MOD on that. We'll get you clarification just as soon as we can. Now, an inquest was told today that Nicola Bulley died as a result of drowning and there was no evidence that she had been harmed. The mother of two disappeared in January whilst out walking her dog along the River Wye in Lancashire. Her body was found 3 weeks later. A Home Office pathologist told the inquest she hadn't been drinking before her death. Other experts also gave evidence at the inquest, saying the river was just 4 degrees, almost freezing, and inhaling just 2 breaths of water would have been lethal. It costs nearly £170,000 to send a migrant to Rwanda. That's according to the Home Office. The government says nearly 37% of people would need to be deterred from crossing the English Channel in small boats for the illegal migration bill to even break even. The assessment also warns that if current trends continue without reducing hotel usage, the asylum system could cost £32 million a day by the end of 2026. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. This is GB News. Now back to Nigel.
Thanks to an eagle-eyed viewer last week, we caused a bit of a hue and cry by saying that the hate cleric, Dr. Inayat Ullah Abbasi, was coming to do a tour around the United Kingdom and that we thought this was rather a bad idea. And the reasons were very, very simple. He described the 9/11 terrorists as brave lions. He'd lauded Osama bin Laden, the leader of the Taliban, and he said that it would be a great pleasure to give those who insult the Prophet beheadings. So we thought on every level, this man should not be coming into this country. Now, towards the end of last week, a couple of events did get cancelled, but today, this video has emerged, and it is Dr. Abbasi back in Bangladesh. Here's what he had to say.
খুব বড় কট্টরবাদী এক ইহুদি নেতা আছে, ওর নাম হচ্ছে ফারাজ। আন্দোলন যে হয়েছে ব্রিটেনকে ইউরোপীয় ইউনিয়ন থেকে বের করেছে, সে নেতৃত্ব দিয়েছে। লন্ডন প্রোগ্রামের দিন সে পুলিশকে থ্রেট করছে, সে আমার বিরুদ্ধে লং মার্চ করবে লন্ডনে। বাংলাদেশের পাতি নাস্তিকরা অপেক্ষায় ছিল আমাকে ব্রিটিশ সরকার নিষিদ্ধ করবে কিংবা ব্লক করবে। সে মূলত আমার বিরোধিতা করেছে, ইহুদি লবি পুরাটাই খেটেছে। তারপরও 4টা মাহফিল আমরা সফলভাবে করেছি। লন্ডন প্রোগ্রামের দিন সে পুলিশকে থ্রেট করছে, সে আমার বিরুদ্ধে লং মার্চ করবে লন্ডনে। তখন পুলিশের অনুরোধে আমরা প্রোগ্রামটা স্থগিত করেছি এবং চলে এসেছি। আলহামদুলিল্লাহ, ইহুদিদের কোনো চক্রান্তই বাস্তবায়ন হয় নাই। বাংলাদেশের পাতি নাস্তিকরা অপেক্ষায় ছিল আমাকে ব্রিটিশ সরকার নিষিদ্ধ করবে কিংবা ব্লক করবে, কিছুই করে নাই। তারা সসম্মানে আমাকে বিদায় দিয়েছে। বাকি কথা পরে হবে ইনশাআল্লাহ।
Now, in case you missed that, this is exactly what Dr. Abbasi said. He said, you guys already know There is an evil politician, and his name is Farage. He is a news presenter and news reporter on Sky News. Well, he got that bit wrong. It's GB News, but never mind. And the Brexit movement was led by him, the movement that kicked Britain out of the European Union. He is the one who opposed me. And he used the entire Jewish lobby to conspire against me. Even after that, we still held 4 meetings successfully. He then threatened the police during the London event to perform a long march against me. We postponed the event after the police asked us and came back. The Jews have failed to implement their conspiracy. Well, Dr. Abbasi, I've been accused of many things before, but working with the so-called Jewish lobby has not in the past been one of them. But my thought, my big debate tonight on this is, how did the Home Office give this man a visa? Give me your thoughts, please. Farage at gbnews.com. And I'm joined by GB News Investigates reporter Charlie Peters. And Charlie, whilst he was here, he appeared to make friends with 1 or 2 local politicians.
That's right. We've broken a story just in the last couple of hours that Nicola Bulley was hosted in the Northampton Guildhall by a Labour councillor by the name of Inam Haq on the 16th of June. He described it as a momentous occasion and a great pleasure for the Labour councillor. He said that Mr. Abbasi was a prominent cleric and a highly respected scholar of the Islamic faith. Now, when I put it to Mr. Haq and the Labour Party that this man was an extremist, using some of the quotes you read out already, indeed the man called for the beheading of Ahmadi Muslims and non-Muslims alike, they said to me that they rejected his views in the strongest possible terms, and Imam Haq also claimed that he was totally unaware of his abhorrent views, which seems a remarkable claim considering how much he was lauding him and his prominence earlier in the month. He hosted in the Guildhall, he came with an entourage, and I think what's been very surprising is that even though we've, through reports, seen so many events cancelled, Leicester, in Luton, and in London as well, that he was able to put on so many successfully. Indeed, it seems, using local support from friends, some of them, it appears, in high places.
And what conclusion, in a big picture here, Charlie, what conclusion do we draw? I mean, if that GB News viewer had not sent me an email, I genuinely wonder whether this chap would have completed the whole tour and nobody would have known. How much of this is going on? Do we have any idea?
Well, we've seen in recent weeks there's been some reports from the Henry Jackson Society about a large number of Islamist preachers existing in the UK. And it does appear that the Home Office is asleep at the wheel on this issue, and that people are able to organise these tours and these speaking occasions without a significant amount of oversight. In short, there are so many to track, and they're not doing a particularly good job of it. And once they're in, the government approach seems to be, as it was in this case, we'll just wait for them to go home. And if GB News hadn't got in touch with these venues and the police and concerned local politicians, some of them Labour MPs, I should add, then I don't think that he would have been able to, he would have been happily able to continue his tour.
No, that's what I agree. Charlie, it's been great teamwork by GB News, and we're going to keep on this case. Well, I'm joined now by Chris Phillips, former head of the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office. Chris, so many questions here. How, what, why? How is it possible? Because this guy wasn't coming on holiday for a fortnight. He was coming for an advertised speaking tour, and he would have had to have filled in a visa application. What's going on?
And that visa application would have gone through the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in Bangladesh. And this person isn't someone that's below the surface. This is a person that's out there expressing these views. They're across the internet. It's just astounding that we're allowing people with those kind of views into our country. And, I mean, it is good work from GB News to pick this up. But the question I've got as well is the whole prevent strategy is about stopping these people from infecting our youths and our people across the country. And this is a complete failure, and I don't understand it, and I think many more questions need to be put towards the government.
Well, thus far, we have asked the Home Office several times what's going on, and they've responded, we don't answer to individual cases. We're getting the same from the police forces, and we have got some FOIs in, so in time we may find out some answers. I mean, the cleric himself does say that ultimately it was the police that called the tour off. But it's all shrouded in secrecy, isn't it?
Yeah, and you've got these big events, and there will be lots of smaller events taking place as well. So we don't know exactly how many of those have actually happened. But this whole group of people that want to infect others to commit terror is something that's been going on for many years. And I thought, quite wrongly it seems, that the government had actually stopped them coming in. We've still got our own fair share in the UK. Let's not, plenty here to worry about.
And the point, folks, for you at home, remember, there is not an ounce of hypocrisy in this. We believe in free speech and open debate. We hate cancel culture, but equally, we can't abide incitement of violence, which very clearly some of these earlier comments were. Chris, you've worked in this area. You've studied this sort of thing for many, many years. How dangerous potentially are charismatic preachers like this?
Well, if you look at some of the other preachers that have really influenced people, one person, we won't go into names, but has influenced so many people to commit terrorist attacks. And we've got Lee Rigby that's been killed. We've got the attack in Manchester. One individual, one or two individuals that go along with this person's type of preaching can kill many hundreds of people. And this is something that I thought we were really making some movements on to stop, but it appears not.
Yeah, well, certainly the source that pointed this particular gentleman out to us says there are several more that have been over the course of the last year, and we're now going to be very much on alert and doing what we can to stop those going ahead. But you mentioned the fact that, we don't need anybody coming and adding to the number. We have not had, fingers crossed, we've not suffered that series of Islamic extremist problems, terrorist outrages over the course of the last few years. And I think we attribute that to the security services and the police in this country. But how big, you said earlier on, we already have a significant problem here. How big is it here?
Well, I think the numbers quoted by the police over the years have been 40,000 people in the country that they're concerned about. That's a huge number. Now, obviously, most of those would not be likely to tip over into committing a terrorist attack, but you don't need very many. One or two actually is lethal, and we've seen it in Manchester, we've seen it in other locations. There's very little the police can do once someone with that aim to go and kill people has actually got that in their mind. They then switch to going to do it, and before you know it, we've got a terrorist attack that's taken place. This is happening not only in England and UK, by the way, right across. If you think of France, they have bigger problems than we have, and they're continuing to have terrorist attacks as well.
And you can attempt, can't you, to track people. You can look for keywords on their social media messaging, but there is a limit, isn't there?
Oh, there's a really small number of police officers engaged in the task of following these people about, and you'd need thousands of police officers. We haven't got enough police officers to patrol our streets. So the thought of being able to monitor and keep these people under check so that they cannot commit a terrorist attack is ridiculous.
And a final thought, Prevent. The Prevent programme that is there to do sort of one-on-one individual contact to try and stop people becoming more extreme. And yet all I hear are repeated stories of failure within Prevent, and worse still, radicalisation taking place in prisons at a really alarming rate.
Yeah, and I think the prison population is a real problem for policing, for terrorism, because they're terrorists, actually people that have been convicted of terrorist attacks are actually now coming back out onto the streets and are on the streets, already having committed a terrorist attack. And I think that's a big issue for society. And a man like this coming in and infecting another group of people is just not what the police need and not what society needs.
No, it's not. Chris, as ever, thank you for coming on and helping us with this debate. And it's not a very cheery debate, I know. But better, is it not, that we, as a challenger broadcaster, determined to tell stories that others don't tell, better that we've exposed this. And I have one promise to make to you. We will go on trying to uncover every single case of this we find. And it's back to you. As it always is, we can't do this without you helping us and telling us what's going on. And I will do my utmost to answer as many of your emails as I possibly can, difficult at times though that is. In a moment, let's find out what on earth happened over the weekend in Russia. Was it rather like the grand old Duke of York, who marched his troops up to the top of the hill and down again? And where on earth is Vladimir Putin? All of that in just a moment.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the people's channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the people's channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the people's channel, Britain's news channel.
So I asked you, how on earth did the Home Office give this hate preacher a visa? Some of your thoughts coming in. One viewer says, the question is, why is the media doing the investigative reporting that the government should be doing? I'm fine with the free speech of fools who believe in fairies and ghosts, but this is clearly a tour of inciting hate and harm. Actually, truth of it is that very often the media can do valuable jobs in exposing these things, and the media can actually be very helpful to the Home Office and the police. The odd thing about this case over the last week is that neither the police forces nor the Home Office appear to even really want to talk to us, which I do find odd. Another says, the Home Office act against taxpayers. Alan says, how did he get a visa? Probably someone working from home thought it was okay. I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh because it's much too serious to laugh, but I get the point. The not fit for purpose Home Office. We were told that 15 years ago. Not much seems to have changed. Now, crime. Let's stick with crime. Extraordinarily, a report out says that from 2020, not a single personal vehicle or bike theft was solved by police in between half and 2/3 of the 30,000 neighbourhoods in England and Wales, according to an analysis of police data. Let's just go through that again. Let's get a handle on this. Since 2020, not a single personal vehicle or bike theft was solved by police in between half and two-thirds of 30,000 neighbourhoods in England and Wales. What on earth is going on? Some people are suggesting that effectively we have decriminalised small, petty theft. That's if you think having your bike stolen is petty. I don't particularly. Well, joining me to talk about this and what's wrong with this culture is Shabnam Chowdhury, former detective superintendent at the Metropolitan Police and somebody who's appeared just a few times on this show with me. Shabnam, is it that kind of crime has grown so much, the types of crime being committed against the person, I think, are getting more serious in every way, and that the police simply haven't got time to look after things? I mean, 20, 30 years ago, you know, personal thefts, you would expect an officer to come and visit the house. Doesn't happen anymore, does it?
That's exactly what we did, Nigel, and that was where we learned our bread and butter business, investigating crime, doing the most simple and the basics of crime that actually matter most to members of the public. And I think what's happened, I think it was about 2015, the National Crime Agency downgraded things like theft, bike theft, vehicle crime, drugs, all those kinds of crimes were downgraded because they were more concerned about dealing with cybercrime, such as terrorist activity, such as sexual offences, fraud online. Crime types have definitely changed without a shadow of a doubt. But unfortunately, one of the things that have been absolutely destroyed policing is the lack of neighbourhood officers within policing neighbourhoods.
Now, you say that, but there are some academic, left-of-centre think tanks who say there is no evidence that police being on the streets makes any difference.
Well, I speak through experience, so your academic can say what they like. What I will say to you is, having led neighbourhood policing when we had sufficient number of officers who could go out and deal with and investigate crimes that were given to them, such as burglaries, such as theft, such as a bike theft from somebody's front garden or whatever. All those types of crimes are no longer investigated because a lot of them have now been moved to frontline policing, who deal with critical incidents, who deal with significant number of mental health issues, who deal with violence against women and girls. So on top of that, they're investigating low-level crimes.
The mental health issue, I mean, several police officers have spoken out recently about this and said, look, we do what we do. We can't be social workers. We can't look after mental health patients. That is difficult, isn't it?
That's really, really difficult because they don't have the experience, they don't have the training, and they don't have the capacity or the understanding of who is stood in front of them and how they're actually dealing with them. This needs a partnership and collaborative approach. I know the Met Commissioner, for example, Sir Mark Rowley, has said that from September onwards, they're no longer going to deal with it. But you can't just drop it because it doesn't work like that.
No, it's happening there in front of you. And
Exactly. But what actually happens is when they're dealing with those types of crimes are not being investigated. There's a lack of experience. There's a lack of supervision. Crimes are closed as quickly as they are investigated or reported. And there's a difference between reporting and investigating. Officers need to understand you have to investigate, not report.
So we've downgraded all sorts of crimes, drugs, cannabis, vehicle theft, the theft of things from people's garden sheds, etc. And yet, this is really interesting because something else is going on here. This is a sort of theory of mine. The crime in England and Wales in the year ending December 2022 showed that at the same time as no crimes were solved in 30,000 districts of England and Wales, but at the same time, overall theft decreased by 20%. Now, I don't find one set of figures very consistent with the other set of figures, because if your chances of being caught are now 0 in up to 2/3 of the districts of England and Wales, that wouldn't put you off from doing it. And I'm just beginning to wonder, Shabnam, I wonder whether the reason these numbers are down is that people have simply stopped reporting crime.
I think that does play a part in it, especially when you're talking about the basic crimes that and I don't like to say basic crimes because they're
real to the people.
Hugely impact on the members of the public because it's really, important to them. But I think that let's talk about the bike thefts, for example, that have been not reported. Number one, I suggest that there's a serious number underreporting of bike theft. Number two, I would suspect that a lot of those that are actually solved are solved by the victims themselves, who go out and they'll view CCTV. They'll go out and investigate the crime first, and then they'll go and hand police officers a package to say, look, I've done your work for you. And I think people do get frustrated by that. They do get fed up with it. There's a huge lack of confidence within policing at the moment. So people don't trust the police, whether they think this is going to be investigated or not. And I think the conversation we were having earlier on is about, does this impact on your insurance?
Well, isn't this the problem? If you report a series of thefts that have taken place from your property, you're going to face a problem with your insurance premium. Better not to report it at all.
Well, I think some people probably think that, but also they weigh up the advantages, the disadvantages, whether there's going to be, you know, it's time-consuming, whether they have to go to court in order to have these persons brought to justice.
Well, if I just think of my own family and friends, over the course of the last few years, the numbers that have been impacted by these sort of crimes is just astonishing. If you had a magic wand, what would you do? Is it the return of genuine community policing?
100%. Police community support officers, neighbourhood policing needs to be uplifted very, very quickly, and actually crimes need to be given back to those officers to investigate, so that frontline officers can deal with the serious crimes such as critical incidents, murders, stabbings, gangs, all that kind of stuff, so that neighbourhood police officers can actually bond with the community and actually build that trust and confidence.
Sounds like common sense to me. Shebnam, as ever, thank you for coming in. In a moment, we will have a look at that Russian coup attempt over the weekend. What really happened? Does anybody actually know?
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Well, Saturday's news was extraordinary, wasn't it? The Wagner group have suddenly gone rogue, turned against Russia, and there they were, calling out Putin's war, taking over Rostov and moving on Moscow. And suddenly, the whole thing's off and the tanks turn around. Were they, like the Grand Old Duke of York, well, they marched up to the top of the hill and back down again. Where is President Putin? And what does it all mean for Russia? Well, James Gator, former naval officer and now working with special project partners, joins me. I think, James, we need to be honest with people at the outset. I think there's more here we don't know than we do know.
Well, as Donald Rumsfeld would have said, there are plenty of known unknowns here, Nigel. I mean, look, to be perfectly honest, I am not going to add to the speculation that is rife today amongst analysts with regard to what is happening in Russia. The real truth about that is that there is a handful of thugs, in the most part, who know what's going on, and the rest is pure speculation.
And Prigozhin, far from... I mean, he said we're being treated like liberators, but, I mean, this guy's a pretty brutal bloke, isn't he?
Oh, absolutely, and it merits saying, and this is absolutely a point of truth, that PMCs exist, private military companies exist, and it's not just Wagner. There are more than 20, according to the State Department. They exist to fulfil a specific purpose, and that purpose is that trust is a commodity in very short supply in an autocratic regime such as Russia. And in its absence, a sort of mutual destruction system has developed in which the PMCs play their part in regulating the power of the military and regulating the power of the oligarchs, in many cases, who own those PMCs. And, of course, sitting on top of all of it, like some grandmaster, is Putin himself, wherever he may be.
Yeah, and Putin, of course, who's used Wagner in Africa, in Syria. I mean, they've done a lot of Putin's dirty work over the years, and it looked on Saturday, although those very same people were coming back to bite him.
Well, as we were speaking about earlier, I mean, this is a matter of perception. PMCs exist almost primarily, notwithstanding the fact that this is a very kinetic campaign, which has sadly led to the loss of life of many young men and women. But the fact is that these private military contractors have indeed been used and are still being used in, as you say, in Mali, where they've replaced French influence, in Madagascar, where they had a role in seeking to reimpose a regime, and in many other areas besides, in the Balkans, even within the EU, you see potential activities on the periphery of the EU in countries such as Bulgaria, where PMCs are peripherally involved.
Now, Prigozhin's off to Belarus. As for Putin's whereabouts, we just don't know, do we?
No, there's no understanding as to where he is, and in many ways that's actually not what's relevant right now. You know, back to your former question, we don't know whether the activities of Saturday are anything from a failed coup through to part of a disinformation campaign. And it's very important that we all, as viewers, as citizens, as practitioners, recognise that these are highly competent operatives in the field of disinformation.
There is some breaking news. Putin's press officer has said that Putin's going to make a series of personal statements later today. We may know a little bit more later on today. But the consensus, James, is that Putin is weakened by the events of Saturday. That must be true.
Well, it's one potential outcome.
But it's not guaranteed.
But it's not guaranteed. I mean, look at what's happened today. You mentioned this breaking news while we were on there, but at the same time, we started the day with potentially library pictures of the Defence Minister visiting a location which has been identified as being within the Special Military Operations Zone, but we don't know when it actually took place.
No.
And then you have announcements. Of course, it's obviously very significant that the Defence Minister himself appeared in this.
Yes.
You know, by means of messaging. So it's been a day of messaging, and this information is merely the last section of messaging.
And we've got some footage here of British jets in the Black Sea that we can show you. And, you know, were they in going into Russian airspace? I just don't know what's going on and what to believe, quite frankly, right now, do you?
Well, it's important to recognise that NATO patrols NATO's borders, irrespective of what's happening in Ukraine, and has done throughout the history of NATO.
Yeah. I mean, this is only a news event because of what happened on Saturday. Now, final big thought on all of this, and really, I think, rather important. China is playing a bigger and bigger role and has a bigger and bigger influence in Russia. You know, the more sanctions we put on Mr. Putin, the more he sought new markets, obviously, logically, no surprise in any of that. And I've wondered over the course of the last couple of months whether almost Putin was China's kind of proxy. And I do think that if Putin's position is weakened, this makes the Chinese Communist Party an even bigger force in the world.
Well, that's a separate point to make. The Chinese Communist Party and their activities, particularly in the South China Sea, are of great concern, and that's why we see this, you know, this Pacific shift from the British Armed Forces and indeed others. But if we're going to mention China, then we should also mention India. Now, the world's most populous country and, you know, very topical, given that Biden was, of course, meeting with Modi of late and discussing matters. And what a surprise, given that it's India's purchase of Russian oil and gas that is also propping up this dysfunctional regime.
Yeah, I mean,
so
India...
we must put the two in the political context in the same bucket.
India, in diplomatic terms, tilting over to the other side.
Well, you might say that. I mean, I would like to think that the world's largest democracy, as it still remains, has enough inertia to recognise that there's much to be lost.
Well, let's hope Joe Biden did some good the other day.
Let's hope so.
James Gator, thank you for coming on and being frank. And interesting, you know, what you got there was a very, very honest analysis, because there's an awful lot that we simply do not know. Now, the What the Farage moment has to be, it's St Paul's Cathedral, even though, of course, we know that the Church of England seems to hate the country these days. But it is pretty remarkable that on the cathedral, St Paul's Cathedral website, Churchill had been described as an unashamed imperialist and a white supremacist, leading to outrage from Nicola Soames, Winston Churchill's grandson, and quite rightly, and they have now toned it down. But now they're after Admiral Lord Nelson, of course. All heroes must be destroyed, where they're claiming that actually Nelson was a great supporter of the slave trade, and I can't see any evidence for that whatsoever. Now, RAF Scampton is a story that we've covered. We did a live show from Scampton a couple of months ago. The news is that the local council there, and indeed one of the councils in Essex, are between them going to the High Court to try and get this decision for those former military bases to house those that have crossed the English Channel recently overturned. And Jack Carson, GB News reporter, is outside the West Lindsey District Council meeting in Gainsborough as we speak. Jack, what's going on?
Well, good evening, Nigel. Yeah, there's this motion here at the West Lindsey District Council tonight. It's been put forward by a Liberal Democrat councillor. It is the Liberal Democrat-controlled council. The motion has called for a halt to this government plan and for the Lincolnshire County Council to join West Lindsey Council in, quote, standing for evidence-based consultative decisions that align with the welfare and aspirations of the people here and those seeking asylum in the UK. Councillor Sebastian Haig, who is the councillor that has put this forward, this motion that's currently being debated right now, is that this is more than just a critique of a single decision, and he kind of attacked Suella Braverman, saying that it's an indictment of an absence of common sense and empathy in the leadership that this area is witnessing from the Home Secretary. Now, that motion, as I said, is going on right now. I've had a Conservative councillor who's in that meeting today that has messaged me to say that as the opposition Conservative group, they are tabling some amendments to the motion this evening because they believe that it is factually incorrect. What those amendments are, I haven't got the details of, but they have said that if those amendments aren't accepted, then this Conservative opposition here on the council will vote against the amendment here today. Now, I did speak to the leader of the opposition of that Conservative council, Councillor Ian Fleetwood, today about, of course, that move from the government to try and house asylum seekers in Scampton, and here's what he said.
The debate tonight is about whether or not we should have our most important, one of our most important assets in the district turned over to a use that has not got planning permission. And the issue attached to it is Guy Gibson, a dog, Lancasters, Lincolnshire, Scampton. If you look at all the Dam Busters maps, you will see that they didn't talk in terms of coming back to Lincolnshire, they talked about coming back to Scampton as a location. Scampton is important to Lincolnshire people, to West Lindsey people. There are so many residents in this location, either living in the married quarters or alongside on the edge of the showground in the brand new ecologically friendly houses, or within 2-3 miles at Welton and other settlements. We have vast numbers of people there. They didn't expect this to happen. This comes as a complete surprise, and it is wrong of the government to propose to do this to such a historically important and sensitive base in Lincolnshire.
So you heard there pretty damning from the Conservative councillor here against the government's plans to house people at Scampton. We know if those plans were to go ahead, they reckon in the first year 5,000 people would be processed through the camp in the first year. But of course the main critique of people and local people here is the fact that £300 million worth of investment was going to go into RAF Scampton for a business park, for hotels, and they're worried that if this decision from the government to house asylum seekers there goes ahead, that investment of £300 million will not only of course be postponed, it could also be cancelled altogether, and that is a lot of investment in the area and jobs that won't then come back. So Edward Lee, who is the MP here, has questioned multiple times in the House of Commons, questioned Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick around how the government will preserve those buildings. Robert Jenrick says that it was always the intention of the government to preserve those listed buildings when they house asylum seekers at Scampton.
Thank you very much indeed, Jack Carson. And, you know, as any regular viewer to the show will know, I think this really, really matters. It's important. In a moment, guess what? In the name of net zero, your bills are about to go back up. I'll tell you why in just a moment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now? Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant Reed, my superstar panel, they're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, as China's carbon dioxide emissions go through the roof with every year that passes and the world gets ready in 2023 to burn 8 billion tonnes of coal, we, of course, in this country are being told we must change virtually every aspect of our lives. Otherwise, there will be a planet catastrophe. And part of that, of course, is the pursuit of net zero, which, as I've said time and again, is all about taking money from the poor and giving it to big, rich, foreign wind farm companies. Well, perhaps I'm being a bit too sceptical. Who knows? Will Hodson is a consumer expert and founder of How to Save It, a campaign to bring down Britain's energy bills. So, Will, we were told little time back that the green subsidies on our electricity bills would be removed, but they're coming back.
That's right. Well, they were shifted into general taxation. So what we're seeing here is the government making a pig's ear of explaining what's actually a pretty vital policy for British bills, and I'll explain why. We are in the midst of an energy crisis, which has made clear how reliant we are on gas. We're reliant because we have old, drafty homes, take a lot of gas to heat, but also we use gas 40% of our electricity. So, being in this mess, we have the right to ask our government, is there a strategy to move us away from gas? And to some extent, these levies we're talking about purport to do it. If we have more insulation, which they fund, you need less gas to heat your homes. And if we can get more renewable energy generated here in Britain, we need less gas for our electricity as well.
I mean, insulation, of course, makes a lot of sense. And with modern buildings, it's fairly easy to do. The older the building, the more difficult and more expensive it becomes. And we understand that and we know that. I mean, energy, it does boil down, of course, to security. I think you're right. I think they are trying to phase gas out, basically. And we're not producing enough of our own. But on the sheer cost of this, I mean, it's estimated this is going to cost every house about £170 a year.
That's right. That's about 8% on the bill, given we're now about £2,000 for the average home. The truth is, these numbers in energy are always going to be eye-watering. We're building an infrastructure that gets electricity and gas to every home. We've already given £25 billion price ticket to Hinkley Point C, which is nuclear, another alternative to gas. We've given, since 2015, I think £20 billion in subsidies to oil and gas companies. So the truth is, it's a huge cost wherever you put it.
When you say subsidies to oil and gas companies, I mean, hang on a second, we've put super taxes on them. I mean, they're paying 75% tax on profits. We haven't helped them that much.
There's been a decent amount because the truth is, at some point, the government needs to direct and incentivise the energy the country is going to use. That involves energy security, which is why you still see gas playing a significant part in our fuel mix.
Yeah, and because it's practical. You can turn it on and turn it off, unlike coal-fired power stations, which we have been reopening, of course, over the course of this summer.
Less practical when everyone in Europe is scrambling to get it because the major supply markets have closed. That's why, strategically, we have to get away from it. And renewable is something we do quite well in this country, of course, Nigel.
And we've got wind farms up in Scotland who, at certain times, we pay not to produce. It seems quite incredible to ordinary people at home that we're lumping 170 quid on people's electricity bills, but at the same time we are often paying companies in the North Sea and Scotland not to produce energy because the wind has produced too much for our needs on that day. I mean, when are we going to come to terms with the fact that intermittent energy through wind is exactly that, intermittent? And I don't know whether you've seen it. I've seen no plans for battery storage that really cut the mustard.
I think the plans are afoot. They're going pretty well. But the fundamental point with intermittent energy is you have to diversify. The wind might not be blowing off Penzance, but it could be blowing in Perthshire. It still leaves a problem that you're going to need to have some reliable energy somewhere, which is why the nuclear projects are so important. Bear in mind, Britain didn't have a new nuclear power plant for 30 years. This is a great illustration of how the government is not really telling the public the full truth of how we need to get past this energy crisis.
Famously, Nick Clegg said we can't go for nuclear because it'll take 10 years. Guess what? That was 10 years ago. So, yeah, there's been way too much short-termism. But what would you say to folk at home who are now facing this 170 quid going on their electricity bills? I mean, would you say it's worth it?
I'd say make sure this policy works for you. You talked about 10 years ago, Nick Clegg. I remember 10 years ago, David Cameron had a stab at these levies as well. Now, the result was insulation rates dropped by 90% across the country. And if only we'd insulated those homes would have paid much less in the grip of a gas crisis that we've just seen. So I think it's a fact that we are living with the energy policies of 10 years ago.
I get that.
We wish we'd had more insulation, and what's more, if we'd had more renewable energy being generated, we wouldn't have been so reliant on gas, and our bills would have been lower. So I say give it a chance and make the policy work for you if there's free insulation to be had, as well as the warm home discount.
Yeah, but the truth is, to really insulate a lot of old homes in this country would cost countless tens of billions, wouldn't it?
Well, to insulate every uninsulated loft in Britain would cost about $5 billion.
Is that all? I'm surprised it's not more.
Not that many left. But the point is that would pay for itself within about a year. It's a crying shame that we can't take more of a strategic approach to doing that, which is what we should expect of the government.
Fair point. Listen, I'm all for us having energy security, absolutely, and not being reliant on anybody else in the world. I'm all for us having affordable energy, which I think with our own gas, when we need it, we could do much more effectively. But I'm not for wasting any energy, so I completely get the point you're making. Will, thank you very much indeed for joining me on the show. Now, we've got a couple of Barrage the Farages in the pipeline.
When did politics become so polarised? It's one extreme or another. There's no grey areas anymore. It's one view or another. The second part of that question is, why is the debate so negative? Everything is against something rather than trying to persuade somebody with a positive point of view. The Remainers during Brexit just argued what the negatives were about leaving rather than trying to persuade somebody the positives of staying, if there were ever any positives there in the first place.
Well, that's very true. I mean, there is no doubt about it that the Leave campaign didn't spend much time saying how blooming awful Brussels was. I guess we've been doing that for the last 30 years, to be fair. But the Remain campaign was all about, if you dare to do this, terrible things will happen. Plagues of black locusts may even descend on your land. Now, they didn't go quite that far, but they got pretty close to it. You asked, John, why is politics, why is there such polarity? Well, actually, I think here's the thing. We used to have big philosophical differences between left and right. Think of the 83 general election, a real choice. The polarity now isn't so much on policy, it's actually more about personality. And I'm going to say this, I think the old left were patriotic. The old left had a great sense of humour. The old left we could agree to disagree with, but generally get on quite well. When we look at the new left, I think those of us on the centre-right look at them and think, well, they're a little bit balmy, but, you know, that's it, fine. They look at us with absolute, total hatred and the belief that we should be cancelled. And so I think that polarity is more, as I say, on a personal level than it is actually about political philosophy. Now, joining me, fresh from a grand dinner to celebrate the bicentenary of the Oxford Union, is Jacob Rees-Mogg.
I was indeed, yes, and we had bastion of free speech there. We actually had Michael Heseltine go on and say how wonderful the Oxford Union is, it's all lovely, and how marvellous you're all here, and isn't Brexit terrible, which was a very strange way to end the evening.
Rather as John just asked in the question, it's almost as if some of those, they literally can't let it go, can they?
They can't, no. Even at the most unlikely occasion, when we were talking about 200 years of free speech, the wonders of the Oxford Union, he had to bring Brexit into it.
Dear.
But tonight,
yes,
we're going to try and explain Russia. What is going on? And I've got a guest who I hope will be able to tell people what's happening and give us some understanding of the details.
I think that's rather important because there are far more, and we were joking earlier about the old Donald Rumsfeld known unknowns and all the rest of it. I'll be sitting in the car going home listening intently to every word, as indeed I know will your audience. I'm back with you tomorrow evening at 7. We have the Trick Awards tomorrow afternoon, so fingers crossed. But first, let's have a look at the weather.
Evening, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. After a bright start for some, it will turn fairly cloudy for most tomorrow. Outbreaks of rain at times across the north, Much of the south will stay dry thanks to this area of high pressure. But this low pressure system is toppling in over the top and will bring, as I say, much of the north a damp day tomorrow. We've seen some heavy showers around during this afternoon, but they're fading away through this evening. Most places becoming dry and clear and will stay that way for most of the night. But here comes that weather system, increasing the cloud in the west and then bringing rain to Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland by dawn. Temperatures will stay at between 11 and 15 degrees for most, so a warmish night, not as humid as it was at the weekend, but a little warmer than it was last night. A damp start then for Northern Ireland. The rain may ease here a little later in the day, but for much of southern and western Scotland, it's a damp day. We'll see rain at times crossing into northern England, north and west Wales too. And eventually some of that patchy rain may trickle into the Midlands. But much of southern England, East Anglia will just stay dry, but with increasing amounts of cloud. The breeze will pick up as the rain arrives. Nothing especially heavy, but some heavier bursts are likely on the hills. Temperatures in the high teens across the north, further south the low 20s. But again, it'll turn quite humid as we go through the day. A lot of cloud, a lot of mist moving into these western areas too, making for a murky, humid night Tuesday night into Wednesday. The rain should ease, at least for a time, across parts of Scotland, staying fairly damp over the hills of northern England and North Wales. But many places will start Wednesday dry, but then another area of rain comes in, initially to Northern Ireland, but then spreading into parts of Scotland, northern England and Wales. And this could have some heavy bursts mixed in. Again, the possibility of a rumble of thunder. To the northwest, it should turn drier, and further south and east, most places again looking dry and fine on Wednesday.